Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is beg. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear beg used is to mean to ask someone humbly for something. And we're going to talk a little bit also about the second definition to ask formally for permission to do something. So these first two definitions, we can see ask is being used. Many times there might be a repetitiveness. So where someone is repeating their request or their ask. I know when I think of this verb, my mind immediately goes to small children who maybe are talking to their parents, mom, dad, and they're going, please, 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 can I? Right? That I feel like really illustrates this verb beg. Okay. Now, a third way you might hear the verb beg used is to mean to ask for something, typically food or money as charity. A little later in the video, we're going to discuss a related word, but many times this is connected to people maybe who do not have homes or do not have much sort of standing in public spaces, asking for people, can you give me money so that I can buy food? Or they might be asking for other things. So, again, we'll use the verb for that as well. Now, a fourth way you might encounter the verb beg specifically relates to dogs. And I've got a little picture to help us understand this. So, when the dog kind of sits up with its paws raised and hopes that it's going to get a treat, usually some kind of food as a reward, we'll also use the verb. So, if you look at that picture, in the bottom right hand corner, we could say the dog is begging for a treat. Okay? You should know that beg is a regular verb. Now, this verb is going to require a spelling change as we add suffixes to make our progressive or past tense and participle forms. So, the reason for this is our verb beg has a consonant vowel consonant spelling. It's one syllable, it's got that short vowel sound. And so what I'm going to do is double the final consonant anytime I'm adding a suffix that starts with a vowel letter. Okay, so ing and ed both start with vowel letters. So you're going to see me double the G to form begging. Begging. Same thing is going to happen when I add ed, the past tense ending. And here, my base verb, beg, ends in a voiced sound. This means my ed ending is just going to make a D sound, and I'm not going to add an extra syllable as I say it. It should sound like this: begged, begged. Okay. Let's move on and talk about a few phrasal verbs you might encounter. You're going to see some similar meanings here. One phrasal verb you might see or hear is to beg for. And again, we're going to think of asking someone earnestly for something or for someone. You might also think of them pleading, repeatedly making that ask or making that request. An example of this might be, the kids have been begging for pizza for over a week. So you can probably imagine a parent or some parents, right, asking their children, what do you want? Pizza? And they're like, no, we're not going to have that every day or every night. But they're going, please, please, can we please have it tonight? Right? That's what we're illustrating here. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to beg from. So again, this goes back to pleading or asking for something from a particular person. An example of this might be, he begged some change from his parents to buy something from the vending machine. Right? So here, the from is telling who he was making the request to. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is beg of. Again, We're back to that meaning of pleading, where someone is repeating their ask or repeating their request. An example of this: I beg of you, please come with me to the appointment. Right? Feel like sometimes you maybe have heard things like this in stories that you've read, or maybe you've seen it in a movie or a TV show. I also think of someone's hands kind of going, please, right? To illustrate that. The last phrasal verb we're going to talk about has a completely different meaning, and that is to beg off. And this is where somebody asks to be excused from something, right? So they're not going to do something. An example of this might be, I begged off the movie last night. I just didn't feel very good, right? So the person here is saying, I didn't go. I did not accept this invitation to join my friends at a movie. Now, let's move on. And before we practice our verb of the day, I thought it might be good to review how we make more information questions. Most teachers and books call these WH questions because our question words frequently start with the letters WH. But again, I like thinking of these as more information, right? I cannot just answer these questions with the words yes or no, which we practice quite often. But instead, I'm going to have to provide something more in my response. Today, we're going to practice making some questions in the simple present. And as a reminder, the simple present is what we use to talk about habits and routines. Think of actions that repeat with a certain frequency. Okay? You might also hear it used to discuss facts. And generally, when we make questions in the simple present, we're going to follow this pattern. We're going to start with our question word. Okay? Then we'll use do or does. It depends on what the subject is. So if you look at my chart here, I'll point out, you can see I use do if the subject of my question is I, you, we, or they. And then I use does if the subject is he, she, or it. Okay? So question word, do or does, our subject, and then you're going to use the base verb. Okay, so no special endings here. No S, no ing, no ed. And it's possible there can be other words to give our question greater context. But if you'd like, what you can do here is kind of pause the video for a moment and look at this chart and practice making questions, right? We could ask something like, why does he study, right? So I'm picking one word from each section to form a question. Okay? You could do that a lot of different ways. But I want to move on and talk a little bit about some sample questions using our verb of the day, beg. We're going to start off with a question about location. To do this, I use the question word where, W-H-E-R-E, right? And then I'm going to follow my pattern. I'm going to say, where does she beg to play? Right? So perhaps there's a small child asking again and again, can we play here? Can we play here? Maybe I don't quite understand what they're saying. So where, right? Where does she want to play? Right? That's what we're asking there. Okay? If you want to ask a question about time, and this can be time as in a date, or it could be time as on a clock, you want to use the question word when. And then again, we're going to follow that same pattern. Here's my example question. When do we beg for an extension? Okay? So maybe there's some kind of deadline that's going to be very hard to meet, right? And I need to know, maybe I'm talking to some classmates, when would a good time be to ask my professor for more time and extension? Okay. Sometimes we ask questions about manner. And to do that in English, you should use the question word how. Okay, so H-O-W. How do they beg for forgiveness, right? We want to know the way. What are they doing or what are they saying to ask for forgiveness? It's also common to see questions about reason, right? We want to understand what motivates or why someone did something. And that's the question word we use here, WHY. Why? Why does he beg? Okay? Want to understand maybe why this person continues to ask and make a repeated request. Finally, if we want to understand or ask a question about something, we call that a determiner. And the most common way you're going to hear that is the question word what, W-A-T. What do they beg for? Okay. So all those first 5 questions that you can see on my screen here all follow that pattern we discussed in the simple present. Now I have 2 more example questions that are just a little bit different. There's a second way to ask a question about a thing, and that's to use the question word which. W-H-I-C-H. This is also a determiner, but what comes after which is a noun. So, what we're essentially asking someone to do when we use this question word is to make a choice from either some things or perhaps a group of things. So, an example of this might be, which dessert does he beg for? Okay, so here, right, I might be asking a question. Perhaps we're looking at a table and there are cakes and cookies and ice cream, right? And I want to know of these desserts, which, right? So I'm going to ask someone to select from that. So our pattern with that, we have which, we have a noun, and then we fall into the same pattern there of using do or does, our subject, and the base verb. The final way you might hear people ask questions is to ask about the person, the subject, the person doing the action. Okay? This changes our question structure a little bit because who functions as both the question word and the subject. So here we might ask, who begs in the street? Okay, we want to know which person, or perhaps it's a group of people. Okay, hope this helps us practice forming questions in the simple present. Now let's move on and talk about some words and phrases that are related to our verb beg. And the first word we're going to discuss is the noun beggar. This is typically a person, many times who is homeless, and they are continually asking for money or food from other people. Now, this isn't a really common word to hear in 2023. As I thought about it, my mind immediately went to a lot of old movies, older literature, stories. Um, and I borrowed a sentence from one of those older pieces of work. So it says, beggars filled the street, waiting for the soup kitchen to open. Here, Soup Kitchen might be an organization, a nonprofit who provides free meals. Many times it is soup, it doesn't always have to be, but kind of the idea is usually foods that are not too expensive and that can be made to serve a large group of people. So that's what's being described in that sentence. Now, a phrase maybe you've heard before. Someone talks about to beg, borrow, and steal, or beg, borrow, or steal. And when they will use all 3 of those verbs together. And many times, what it means is someone's going to do whatever it takes, whatever is necessary to get something they want or something that is needed. An example of this in a sentence might be, I don't care if we have to beg, borrow, or steal. We need to get enough books for everyone. Okay, so perhaps this is a sentence a teacher or some other school administrator, right? Each child or each student needs a book for a particular activity, and here they're saying we're going to do everything we can to make that happen. One last phrase for us to discuss today, and that phrase is to beg one's pardon. Perhaps you've heard this used again. Maybe you'll see it in movies or TV shows, but it's a very polite phrase. And it's used as a way to express an apology, to say you're sorry. Perhaps when you've done something impolite, you've made some type of mistake, or even maybe you didn't hear something clearly and you want someone to repeat something again. An example of this might be, I beg your pardon, I lost my balance, and I didn't mean to bump into you. So here someone maybe has tripped a little bit, um, kind of run into another human being, right? And they're asking or expressing, I'm sorry, with that phrase, I beg your pardon. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.